Welcome, bienvenidos to Elecciones 2018. I'm Elizabeth Ortega, your host and producer. Tonight you will have a chance to hear and meet Julie Reiley. Julie is a candidate for the Board of Education at large. Mrs. Reiley is a parent, advocate, and a co-chair in the Special Education Advisory Committee. And Santiago David Tavara, he's a writer, editor, and reporter. Welcome, Julie. Good evening. How do you plan to provide high-quality education for all students?
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. Sort of my vision for providing a high-quality education for all students is to take a differentiated approach. We need to set aside one-size-fits-all solutions and goals and appreciate that we have a very diverse student population with diverse needs and diverse strengths, and we need to accept that as our premise when moving forward and try to take a more student-focused approach. One of my ideas in this regard, because I think that the achievement gap is something that we really need to address, and we've spoken about it for a long time in Montgomery County, but I sort of question why haven't we tried the approach of sort of individual student learning plans, and I would like to see a pilot program where we have student learning plans that are provided to students who we believe are going to be at risk for falling into the achievement gap. We have a lot of data on that. We've known for years which schools have more students who fall into the gap. And so I think that we could identify a good candidate for a pilot program, bring stakeholders together to try to create a good and useful tool in terms of a plan, and use that as a possibility for addressing the achievement gap and bringing greater equity across the county.
So when you talk about the achieving a gap, you said in your website that you will seek the advice from experts. But what would you like to do, a specific you?
Me would be to have the student learning plans and have a pilot program. I think we should start with a pilot program so we could, once we bring experts together to create a plan, then we could have a pilot program and then evaluate that, see what seemed to work, what might need to be done differently. So that would be my specific idea.
And have other board members do that in the past?
Not that I'm aware of, and I'm the only candidate in this race that has mentioned the student learning plans, but I've been an advocate for many years for special education students, and special education students have IEPs, individualized education programs, and I'm not suggesting anything as sort of in-depth as that, and IEPs are required by law. But their tool, the reason we have the IEPs is because for years there was such a disparity in the academic results of special education students versus general education students, and federal law was passed to make sure that our students with special needs got what they needed, and that goals were met and their specific needs and strengths were considered. So for me, the student learning plan would be inspired by a program like that.
For people who are not familiar with this position, Montgomery County Board of Education at large, can you describe your job? You're elected. What things you're going to be doing?
Well, the Board of Education has 8 seats, and every election, half of the seats are up for election. So the at-large, like all of the seats, voters vote countywide, and then the at-large seat is no different in that regard. Different candidates approach it differently, I think. Some would say that the board's job is purely oversight, and there's a lot of truth in that. But I think it's really important for board members to be able to and willing to devote a significant amount of time and attention to their responsibilities on the board. I mean, I'm at the point in my life right now, for example, where after having practiced law for a number of years, having taught law students for a number of years, my son is older, I have the ability right now, I took a break from teaching to really devote myself full time to the board, and it wouldn't be my intention to second guess everything, but I think board members should really make research-based decisions, you know, do a lot of the legwork, do a lot of the homework before deciding issues, and then also they need to spend a lot of time, I believe, reaching constituents, engaging the community. One of my other ideas is to have a series of town halls and make that part of the regular board responsibilities, whether it's the entire board, a couple of board members. I'm happy to go have town halls with any other board member who'll go with me.
How many years have you been an advocate?
In more formal roles, probably 8 years, about 8 years. I've served on the PTA boards of all my son's schools. I know what it's like to be an elementary school parent, middle school and high school. I've typically been the special needs liaison, and for the past few years, I've been one of the co-chairs on the Montgomery County Special Education Advisory Committee.
What is your major achievement related to this job? Could you share with your voters? Some of, you know, make you proud to get some.
Some of my past achievements.
Yeah.
Well, I'm honored to be to have received the Maryland PTA Lifetime Achievement Award, and that was for advocacy that I've engaged in the county, but also in Annapolis. And when the Washington Post endorsed me, they focused a lot on my advocacy work. We stopped a bill in Annapolis that had been introduced that would have cut back on the number of days before an IEP meeting that parents get the documents that they rely on. There was a proposal to cut that time significantly. I brought together parents. I worked with another parent and had a petition. We did an email campaign, and we stopped it. I worked for a number of sessions on a bill to change how due process hearings are, who has the burden of proof in due process hearings for special ed. We haven't passed that yet in the Senate. A version of it is passed in the House in the past. And more recently, Dr. Smith proposed as part of the operating budget to cut all 6 of the special education cluster supervisors in Montgomery County. And now I understand his desire to bring resources to the classroom, but when you've got a big county and a diverse county with diverse needs of students with special needs, those cluster supervisors are a really critical resource for parents and for the resource teachers for special education at the school level. That's the go-to person if you have a child with complex needs, or maybe the parents in the school are not in agreement on what should be provided for the student. So we were concerned about the complete elimination of those positions. We had a petition, we did an email campaign. I and one of my co-chairs testified at the board hearing, and we were able to save three of the positions of the 6. And I'm happy to say, if you look at our petition, a lot of teachers signed it.
Is that why the Washington Post endorsed you, or why do you think that they endorse you?
Well, I think, and what they said was that, you know, they recognized my experience advocating, and they understand that I understand it's a diverse student population. They have diverse needs, and we really need to try to take a differentiated approach and be really thoughtful in our strategies.
Can you give us some numbers on the achievement gap among African Americans and Latinos or Hispanics? Is real bad in the county?
I'm trying to think if I can give you the right percentage this moment.
Oh,
It's not as bad as the national average, but it's still unacceptable. And that would be my response, because if we were to stop now and say, well, it could be worse, it's worse in other states, then you're doing such a tremendous disservice to the students that are falling into that gap. And we do have great teachers, and we want to keep our great teachers, but I think more imperative is focusing on the students and trying to bring together the teachers and an individualized sort of approach to our students, and that would be the way to address it. And plans could also inform parents of community services that are available, all sorts of things and resources to help.
Do you have an idea how many Latino students are going to graduate this year?
Let's see, I think 35% of our population are Latino students. And I think the gap is, I'm not sure, I don't want to misstate the number on the gap, but it's it's in the double digits, is my understanding.
Is that something that you will look into that if you become board member?
Oh yeah, I mean I have the numbers right here in my bag.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Yeah, no, and I know that I've read them many times, but I guess it's the lawyer in me. I don't want to say a specific percentage, and then I will hear that I'm 3% off or something.
Don't worry
But
about
it's important. It's really really important, and there's no excuse for it.
Some people, and I'm gonna tell you by my experience, that I have covered elections for many years in one way or another, either a newspaper or television. Some people in the Latino community, they are fed up with this issue about achieving the gap and that they promise all these things. I would like you to tell us your commitment to work with. I know all because you said all in your advertisement, but with the Latino population who are the forgotten ones.
Oh, I'm very, very, very committed. And not just because I'm Mexican American and well, I'm Syrian American too, but because we all matter. And I was the first person in my family to go to college, and it's because I had a quality high school public education. And I want every student, I want every Latino or Latina student to have that. And that's why I'm hopeful that if we take an approach, try a pilot program for learning plans, that maybe that will make the difference. And I'm not unwilling to stand up against pushback on something like that. I was on the other side of a strong, well-organized group in Montgomery County in Maryland on special education bills I worked on, and I was pushing to change the burden of proof in our due process hearings, and I got a lot of pushback, and I wasn't afraid to keep going because my priority is the students.
This is the first time you're running for public office. How do you feel about knocking on doors, talking to people? Can you share your experience?
Actually, meeting the people is the best part for me. I've it's a lot of work, but I knew it would be, and it's good training for if I were fortunate enough to serve. I intend to, as I've said, devote myself fully to that. Montgomery County is a very engaged community in a lot of ways, and I've enjoyed meeting people. The forums are kind of fun. I like talking about my ideas. I sometimes can admittedly get a little frustrated because I'm someone that likes to have more specifics. So sometimes the questions don't allow us a very long answer. It's like, I have more.
Well, going around the county, did you hear something that you didn't know from parents, from families?
Yeah, one of the areas where I've learned something is about the turf and the turf fields. That was very interesting to me. And another area where I've learned more about I was fully aware of our magnet programs and our consortium model, but I spent a lot of time before going to the community and attending, in fact, a forum there on really sort of rereading material I'd already read, and sort of re-going through our METIS report, because that was a very interesting analysis of some of the benefits and some of the downsides, and ways that the programs may not be doing what we'd expected.
Fundraising, who is financing your campaign? How are you getting funds?
¿Quién te da el dinero?
Yeah, see, I'm looking at his husband right there. We did start off self-funding, and we have had donations, but to be honest, when I've had meet and greets, and I never charge for them. It's nice if people donate, but I want to meet the community, and I don't want people to feel like they have to pay to meet me. So.
Can you tell us where you live and also your roots? You have Mexican background, right?
Yes, I do. Well, we live down in Bethesda, and I grew up in California. I've lived in Montgomery County for 30 years, I think now, and grew up in Southern California in Los Angeles. My mom was born on Calexico, which is a border town in California and Mexico, and so that's where I have my Mexican American ancestry. And it was, it was an experience growing up and attending school, and middle school in particular in the 70s in Southern California. There was a lot of racism. And granted, some people would say things in front of me not knowing that they were talking about me or talking about my mom. And, and some people said things knowing full well that I'm Latina. And it was hurtful at times, and that's part of where I get my commitment to making sure that we have good programs and really work on anti-bullying, on inclusion, on having a welcoming, heart and minds in our schools, and teaching that to our students, because I don't like the idea of students having to go through what I went through.
What happened to you? Something can you mention?
Well, I don't want to say the words, but,
Were they ugly words?
I call them slurs, So I remember, in middle school, people would say, I had a discussion with a peer. We were talking about Martin Luther King Day, and we both genuinely believed it was a wonderful thing to start commemorating. But when I talked about it in terms of, recognizing that we're all equal, whether you're black, whether you're Mexican American, I was explained to me, no, Julie, Dr. King wasn't talking about Latino students.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree. I disagreed then.
Yeah.
But
is that why you became an attorney?
That's an interesting question. Why did I was the first person in my family to go to college and certainly graduate school, and it might have been some of my sense of social justice.
Mm-hmm. What part of law did you practice?
But yeah, when I practiced law, I practiced in private practice for a while. I did criminal defense work, and then I worked for Whitman Walker Clinic and did a lot of volunteer pro bono work in Whitman
DC,
Walker
right?
Clinic. In DC, yes.
It was founded by, Jim Graham was involved, right?
I think so. I was there in the 90s before my son was born, and I did a significant amount of work, and that was some of the most fulfilling work I've done.
I'm sure.
Before advocating for students with special needs. And then I practiced law in the federal government. I brought civil enforcement, federal complex financial federal fraud cases for one of the agencies.
So the children fleeing violence from Central America that are coming by the hundreds.
Yeah.
And how do you think that the schools should treat them?
Well, I want there to be no mistake about this, because Secretary DeVos simply doesn't understand that as a long-standing legal matter, we have the obligation to educate all of these students, but it's not just an obligation. We should treat it the same way we treat all our students, as a privilege and an honor, and part of our greater commitment to a public education for everybody, because I strongly believe that a strong public education is the cornerstone of a prosperous and safe society and an advanced society, and we need to welcome these children. We need to make sure that they have additional resources that might be available in the community, and to the extent, for example, that we have immigrant students who might be susceptible to falling into the achievement gap, and we had student learning plans. Community resources are something that can be built into a plan, so that at the very least we could be connecting parents and families with resources that are available to them.
So I heard your son talking in Spanish a few minutes ago. So you're connected with the Latino community?
Not as much as I would like, I admit. Since I moved here and then my son was born, I've been very much focused on special education needs and advocacy because of our family situation. And when I had, years ago, I had a file for due process against the schools because they were trying to change his placement, and I disagreed. And one of the things that struck me is that I was able to be successful in filing and reaching an appropriate result in mediation, but that's because I was fortunate. I had a legal background. I knew how to advocate. But I kept thinking, what if it was my mom who did not she was a secretary and a terrific one, but she would not have known how to maneuver the system. And in
Or
fact,
John Doe or Maria Perez.
or what if I was going to say, what if you're a Spanish-speaking family and English is not your first language? It is tremendously difficult, and one thing we do need to make sure, I know MCPS tries, is to make sure that we consistently have translation services for families in the IEP meetings. I do believe that is something they do try to do. But yeah, no, I mean, I was very concerned about families who don't necessarily have the resources or understanding of the system, or some cultural differences, because some families come from different parts, from different countries, and it might be a cultural sort of phenomenon that you don't ask the school for things. I've heard that from many parents who speak to me, and parents who have spoken to me. I was speaking to a woman who translates for Spanish speakers in the IEP meetings, and she's told me, and I had a really terrific conversation with her, although I knew some of it, but I liked hearing it directly from her, about the need for making sure the families understand not just what they're entitled to, but I guess that they're entitled to it, and trying to bridge that gap as well. Because, if you have any concerns about your immigration status, for example, you might be concerned about requesting your child's services.
And one more question on
Okay.
school shootings. Do you support this proposal that teachers should be armed?
No, no, not at all. I mean, if you look at students of color, Black boys in particular and Latino boys in particular, are more likely to be suspended out of school or expelled, and that's how you have your school to prison pipeline. So they're already more likely to be unfairly treated with non-lethal means. I fear, and then we know in society we have seen too many men of color being unarmed and shot. We are not going to. No guns for teachers. Never.
Good for you. Good for you. Julie, thank you very much. Very, very much. I wish you the best in your campaign, and I hope you win the elections. And congratulations that the Washington Post endorsed you. And can you give us your website address?
Sure, it's www.Reiley, that's REILEY, the number 4, and education.com.
Good luck in your campaign, and thank you, Santiago.
Thank you.
We'll see you each other next week.
Thank you.
Bye.